Okay, so today we're diving into the world of gluten.
All right, sounds good.
What it is, why it's become this, like, I don't know, buzzword almost.
Right.
And should you actually, like, be worried about it? And you've sent in some interesting research, especially this Dr. Pooh Guerrero.
Yes, that's always an interesting one. Makes me wonder what their specialty is.
Yeah, just a little bit. I mean, hey, at least it's memorable, right?
That's true.
And speaking of memorable, let's talk gluten. Why does it feel like gluten is everywhere these days?
It really does. Gluten has gone from kind of a niche topic to this mainstream, like, health conversation. And I think people are a lot more aware of it, even if they don't necessarily understand it.
Yeah, and for those of us who don't have a PhD in, like, baking science, can we just break down what gluten is?
Yeah, so at its most basic, gluten is a protein.
Yeah.
It's found in wheat, barley, and rye. And, for most of human history, it hasn't been a problem. People have been eating it for a really long time.
Which kind of begs the question, why all the fuss now?
Right.
And this Dr. Guerrero research kind of seems to suggest there's more to the story than people are just suddenly more aware of it.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Dr. Guerrero actually highlights three kind of main ways that people react to gluten. So you have an allergy, celiac disease, and then something called non-celiac gluten sensitivity. And it's really important to understand the difference between those three.
Okay, let's unpack that a little bit because I feel like this is where things can get confusing for people.
Total.
When they hear gluten, they think, oh, I need to avoid it. But it's a little more nuanced than that.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the first thing to differentiate is a true gluten allergy. That's also sometimes called a wheat allergy. And it's actually pretty rare. It's a serious, immediate immune response. So we're talking potentially anaphylaxis.
So like a peanut allergy, but for gluten.
Exactly. Even trace amounts can cause a really serious reaction.
Okay, that's definitely something to take seriously.
For sure.
Now, what about celiac disease?
So celiac disease is different. It's not an allergy in the traditional sense. It's actually an autoimmune condition.
Yeah.
And basically what happens is if you have celiac disease, your immune system sees gluten as the enemy and attacks it. But the problem is it's not just attacking the gluten, it's also damaging the lining of your small intestine. Those little finger-like projections called villi, those are super important for nutrient absorption.
So it's not just that it doesn't like gluten, it attacks gluten and then damages your intestines at the same time.
Yeah, it's like collateral damage.
Wow.
Because those villi, they're responsible for absorbing nutrients from your food. Like imagine, tiny little fingers reaching out, grabbing all the good stuff, and your body needs those.
And then celiac disease comes in and attacks those fingers.
Basically, yeah. The inflammation that happens causes the villi to flatten, so they can't absorb nutrients effectively. And that leads to all sorts of problems, like digestive issues are very common, but also you can have nutrient deficiencies because you're just not absorbing things properly.
And something else I remember from Dr. Guerrero's research, like celiac disease can be tricky, right? Sometimes it doesn't even show any symptoms.
Yeah, that's one of the really challenging things about it. It makes it hard to diagnose because some people experience the classic symptoms, right? Like they're having frequent diarrhea, maybe bloating, abdominal pain, that sort of thing.
So something's wrong.
Yeah.
But other people could have it and have no idea.
Absolutely. And that's why people are often diagnosed later in life, like in their 50s or 60s, because they've had it for years. Maybe they've had some vague symptoms like fatigue or they're iron deficient, but nothing that really screams celiac disease. And so it kind of goes unnoticed.
Like a silent thing happening.
Exactly. And imagine like going that long with this undiagnosed autoimmune condition, and all the while, your body's not absorbing nutrients properly.
Yeah. That's scary. And it makes you wonder, is that part of the reason that we're seeing this, I don't know if rise is the right word, but this increase in celiac diagnoses? Is it just that we're getting better at recognizing it, or is it something else?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and researchers are actually looking into that. There's a few different theories about why it seems to be more prevalent now. One thought is that our modern diet plays a role.
Because we're just eating more gluten than ever.
That's part of it. But it's not just the quantity of the gluten. It's also potentially the quality of gluten we're eating. And Dr. Guerrero talks about how the type of wheat that we consume today is very different from what our ancestors would have been eating.
Oh, you're talking about hybridization.
Exactly.
I have to admit, when I saw that in the research, I was like, okay, cool, fun fact. But it's actually more important than that.
It's a big deal. And modern wheat has undergone a lot of hybridization. It's all about increasing yield, making it more resistant to pests and diseases, that sort of thing.
Which on the surface sounds like a good thing.
Right.
But then it's not.
But there's always a trade-off, right?
Right.
And one of the things that they found is that these hybridized varieties of wheat tend to have higher concentrations of gluten than the ancient grains that humans have been eating for, thousands of years.
So not all gluten is created equal. Okay, this is already blowing my mind.
Right. It's more complex than you might think.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, the way that we process wheat today is also very different. Like modern bread making, it's all about speed and efficiency.
Which, let's be real, is how we like our bread.
Exactly. We want it fast. We want it convenient.
Yeah.
But there's this theory that some of these rapid processing methods might actually be making the gluten harder for our bodies to break down.
Even if you don't have celiac disease.
Potentially.
Yeah.
So not only are we potentially consuming higher amounts of gluten, but it also might be structurally different from what our bodies are, evolutionarily used to.
Okay.
And that's a question that researchers are just starting to explore.
Wow. So is this like we engineered our way into a problem?
It's an interesting thought, right?
Yeah.
It really makes you think about, has our food system in some ways outpaced our biology?
Wow.
It's pretty fascinating.
So it's like we've created this, I don't know, perfect storm for a gluten problem.
In a way, yeah.
Yeah.
And it really highlights how important it is to be aware of these things, these more nuanced aspects of our food system.
So where do we go from here? Are you saying everyone should ditch gluten altogether?
Not necessarily. It's not about saying gluten is bad, avoid it at all costs. It's more about listening to your own body and figuring out how it reacts to gluten.
Because for a lot of people, it's totally fine.
Exactly. But for some people, yeah, even small amounts can cause a lot of discomfort. And that's where this whole idea of non-celiac gluten sensitivity comes in.
NCGS.
Yeah. So with NCGS, people experience symptoms very similar to celiac disease. So we're talking like bloating, gas, fatigue, but they don't have that same immune response. And there's no damage to the intestines.
So their body's like, nope, don't like this, but we don't really know why.
Pretty much. And it can be really frustrating, both for the people experiencing it and also for doctors who are trying to help them, because we still don't fully understand NCGS, what causes it, why some people are more sensitive than others. It's a bit of a mystery still.
This is where I feel like the Dr. Guerrero research was interesting because they talk a lot about listening to your gut, like literally.
And that's really the key takeaway here.
Mm-hmm.
If you're having digestive issues, and they seem to be connected to when you're eating gluten, it's worth paying attention to.
So not going completely gluten-free, but maybe just being a little more mindful.
Exactly. Maybe try keeping a food diary. See if you notice a pattern. Talk to your doctor. You could even experiment with a short-term elimination diet and see if that makes a difference.
It's amazing to me how something that seems so simple, it's just this protein in bread.
Right. But there's all this complexity to it.
There is.
It can have such a big impact on people.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable. And I think it just goes to show how interconnected everything is. The food we eat, our environment, our health, it's all tied together.
Well, I have to say, this has been a fascinating deep dive.
Yeah.
We went from the basics of what is gluten to really kind of digging into these deeper questions about how it might be affecting us in ways that, honestly, we're just starting to understand.
Absolutely.
So next time you're having a bagel or a sandwich or some pasta.
Or a donut.
Or a donut, yes. Maybe think twice about the gluten in there.
Exactly.
And that's it for today's deep dive. Make sure to check back next time when we'll be exploring another fascinating topic impacting your world. Until then, happy listening.